Are we live now?
Yes, we are
Okay.
live. We'll give it a few minutes. Hopefully folks will start to join on with us. I'm not sure if I can even see the messages, so that's great.
Well, good afternoon if anybody's on early. We're just kind of hanging out here in the garden. It's a beautiful day. We're at the Leach Teaching Gardens, and Lisa Whittlesey and I are just talking about how different things look. We're talking probably 7 or 8 weeks since Dr. Nesbitt and I were out here, and we can still see quite a bit of damage, but we can see plants starting to grow out of the damage now, and of course the damage is becoming much more evident. I was taking some pictures on the citrus. We can definitely see the extent of the damage, but you can also see some of them are shooting out, producing shoots again, and some are pushing shoots out from below the bud union. Some are coming from above, and so it's good to see that some of those are going to be survivors. We've saved the bud union, the scion, and so hopefully those can be recovered, salvaged.
Well, Tim, we've got some folks joining us. It's another beautiful day, but a windy day.
A little bit windy still, yeah.
At the Leach Teaching Gardens, but I'd say that let's go ahead and talk. What's going on this weekend that has got everybody buzzing?
Well, we're still talking a lot about freeze damage and the ramifications of that, but as I said earlier, it's just amazing to be out here and see the difference 7 or 8 weeks makes. We've got things in bloom, of course, in a lot of places. The wildflowers are just beautiful this year, which is great. They're a little bit late, but Easter's a little bit late this year. Speaking of Easter, we're going to be talking today about Easter lilies. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, how they're grown, how you can take care of them. And you may not be aware of this, but you can actually continue to grow Easter lilies as a landscape plant in much of Texas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So this is an Easter lily. It's Lilium longiflorum, which in Latin, that last part epithet of the scientific name means long flowered. Of course, these are certainly large flowered plants, very long flowers. And of course, Easter lily, we use it to celebrate Easter, celebrate the death and resurrection of Christ. And of course, it's become synonymous with spring as well. These beautiful white flowers and nice foliage as well. And so this one was actually grown at clay pat greenhouses in my hometown of Blanco, Texas, there in the hill country. And so shout out to clay pat greenhouses. I know this is a good, very nice quality plant, not surprisingly. And so let's just talk a little bit about the history and just where these beautiful plants come from. And so the Easter lily, again, Lilium longiflorum, it's in the Liliaceae family. It's a true lily. And it's actually native to the southern islands of Japan. It was brought over quite a long time ago. It really became popular after World War I. But most of the bulbs that are actually grown are now grown on the Northern California, Southern Oregon border, where the climate is really nice and cool and mild, really conducive to growing these plants. So basically the way these plants start out is from a tiny little bulb. So if you've never seen a bulb, the actual bulb of an Easter lily, it's what we would call a scaly or non-tunicate bulb. So as opposed to an onion or a daffodil or amaryllis bulb, it's going to have a bunch of these little scales, and so they would take these little scale pieces off. They grow them for a little while. These little bulbets start to develop into a new bulb. And after about 3 or 4 years, it's a pretty long time, 3 or 4 years grown in optimum field conditions, these bulbs are dug, they're harvested in the fall, and they're sent to commercial greenhouses like clay pat greenhouses in Texas. And so what they'll do is they'll plant these bulbs in a container. In this case, this is just a 6-inch container like this, and they're grown, of course, at a certain time and at a certain speed to get these things to flower. Now, the difference between an Easter lily grown for Easter, and a poinsettia, which is grown, of course, primarily for Christmas, is that there's a very, very narrow window that these plants are really going to be sold. And so it's very, very difficult. It takes a lot of science, really, and a lot of experience to know when to plant these things, when to grow them. And so We control these in the greenhouse by temperature. The cooler the plants are kept, the slower they grow. The warmer, the faster they grow. And growers even have an idea of how many leaves it takes from the bulb emerging to get the flowers. And so all this has to be monitored, of course, to make sure that this plant is ready just in time or just before Easter. And so that's how these plants are grown. So let's talk a little bit about this weekend if you're looking for an Easter lily. Of course, there's still some beautiful ones in the stores right now. One of the first things you're going to look for is the plant itself, okay? So we want to see nice dark green foliage. If we see foliage at the bottom, any of these little leaves that are starting to turn yellow, that'll indicate probably that the plant's not happy. There may be some root damage. So we see throughout, from the bottom to the top, nice dark green leaves. No burning on the leaves, anything like that. We also want to look, of course, at the flower buds. And so this plant has a total of 6 buds. And so obviously you're paying for the flowers, and so the more flower buds, the better. Now, you may be enticed when you go to the store. You may want to get the one that's the most showy, that's going to have all of its flowers open already. And even though that may look good initially, it's not going to last as long. And so we really recommend that you look for a plant that's in this stage where it's got one open flower, so you get to see what it's going to look like, of course. But then you have most of the flower buds are still going to be nice and tight. This way, this will bloom potentially for another week or so at least, okay? Some people will actually elect to buy these, if they can, before any of the flower buds are open. So we get this beautiful plant, we wonder, what do we do with it? Where do we put it? Well, this is a full sun plant. It's got leaves, so it wants to be in the light. It actually also prefers cool conditions, so inside is a good place to put it, next to a bright, well-lit window. It's getting plenty of sun. Of course, we always get questions on how much to water it, and a general rule of thumb is if it feels dry, or you can see the color of the soil, the substrate, which is primarily peat moss. If it looks dry, if it's got a tan color, it's probably time to water. We want to water thoroughly. People will also use ice cubes to do this. If you do buy one that's in a sleeve, sometimes we can get plants that are in a sleeve. This one is in a pot cover type thing. It's best to take it out of the sleeve, because that sleeve is going to kind of suffocate the roots. Those roots they're living and breathing. We want good gas exchange, okay? Now this one's not too bad because it's not totally surrounding it. And so, of course, this thing will last for a pretty good while. So that's how we take care of it while it's blooming. But you may be surprised to know that this can make an outstanding landscape plant as well. And so once the flowers are spent, one thing I want to mention, as someone who suffers from allergies myself, the pollen is not really that allergenic, but just to help prevent it from the pollen from dropping everywhere and making a mess, it's a good idea when these open to carefully pull off the anthers and dispose of them so you don't have pollen getting on everything.
That's a good point, and really for all lilies to do that, because
yeah,
they'll stain things.
Absolutely. Any kind of lily, amaryllis, same kind of thing. So once we've got this plant, it's finished blooming, you may be tempted to throw it away, but we recommend that you don't, especially for you gardeners out there. It's always fun to take something and turn it into a plant that you can grow in the ground. And so what we're going to do is, as quickly as possible, once it's done blooming, of course you can remove the spent flowers, but we want to get it outside where it gets plenty of sun. This is a sun-loving plant. Now we can keep it in a pot. Of course, it would need a larger pot, or we can plant it in the ground. If you're planting in the ground, you want to select a full sun or site with the most sun possible. These plants do need very good drainage, so you may need to put them, we really recommend putting them in a raised bed with copious amounts of organic material, lots of compost that's going to, of course, hold nutrients, supply nutrients to this plant. Lilies are generally heavy feeders, so we want lots of compost. We may need to add a little bit of nitrogen the next year in the spring. And of course, even though this plant needs good drainage, we want to water it adequately. Now remember, okay, a bulb is basically, I like to think of a bulb as a battery. Okay, a bulb is a storage organ connected to these solar panels. And so that bulb needs to be recharged. And so these solar panels, right now, they're doing that. So until that bulb can get its carbohydrates replenished, we want to make sure we leave the foliage there. So this thing will let you know, it'll turn yellow. The foliage will senesce, and at that point we can cut it off to the ground, and that's okay. And then the next year, hopefully, you will get another set of flowers. Now, of course, keep in mind, if you're growing them outside, they're not going to be in the greenhouse. They're going to be a bit later. Oftentimes, late spring to early midsummer, they'll bloom, but they'll still be fabulous, absolutely outstanding, and with good care can survive and thrive for many years in the landscape.
Okay. Any other last minute things that you might want to share, Tim, of stuff that are blooming right now in the garden?
Yeah, that's a good.
About 5 more minutes.
Good question. So it just so happens that we're surrounded by some other spring blooming or blooming bulbs. This is a type of crinum lily. Crinum lilies, depending on the color, can also be referred to as milk and wine lilies. These come to us from Africa. They have very large tunicate bulbs, so they're going to be more like an onion. They're not going to have the scales on them. This is a very, very easy plant to grow for most of Texas, at least the more southern part of Texas.
And some are pretty fragrant, aren't they?
Absolutely. I know my good friend and mentor, Dr. William Welch, his favorite cultivar is Miss James Hendry. Now that's Hendry like Henry, but with a D, actually. It'll bloom most of the year. Great fragrance. It's got a nice pink color to it. And so these are actually relatives of Amaryllis. They are actually in the Amaryllidaceae family, but there are many other bulbs that will do well for us. There are some narcissus that we can grow. We can't grow for most of Texas the typical daffodil, but we can grow the Grand Primo, the Narcissus italicus. We can grow jonquils. We can also do Amaryllis. Amaryllis, especially the old Amaryllis johnsonii. That is the hardy red amaryllis that many of you probably have from your great-grandparents. It's a staple across the South. Very easy bulbs to grow. We have rain lilies. We have Lycoris radiata, or spider hurricane lilies that bloom after the first rain in early fall, late summer. And we also have oxblood lily, or schoolhouse lily, Rhodophylla bifida, which blooms also in early fall. And so even though Texas, we can't grow, often, for the most part, we can't grow things like our typical crocus and Dutch hyson and tulips, we can grow some other very spectacular bulbs as well. I believe there's been a link posted in the comments section, but there's a great resource that our outstanding Professor Emeritus in Horticulture, Dr. Jerry Parsons, has done remarkable work in San Antonio, and he's got a great resource that hopefully that link is posted there on everything you need to know, even more details than I gave you, especially about the history for Easter lily, and a lot of other good stuff on there too.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So get out there and let them know to get their Easter lilies.
Get your Easter lilies and don't throw them out. Make sure you get them in the ground and see if you can grow them following years. So.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.